Beneath the crushing depths of Eryndor's ocean, Jordan Mason fights to repair a dying mining station, until a deafening explosion sends him crashing into a world of chaos. But it's not just the wreckage that's a problem. Floating in the darkness is a Klytheran, a broken enemy, or is she something more? With time running out and danger closing in, Jordan must decide, save his enemy, or leave or die. But as secrets unfold and alliances shift, the lines between foe and ally blur. Will Jordan be able to trust her, or will his decision change the fate of both their species forever? Don't miss the thrilling twists ahead. Like and subscribe to follow Jordan and Zyrax's journey as they uncover dangerous truths and face impossible choices. Stay tuned for the next chapter. The ocean depths of Eryndor press down on Jordan Mason like a living thing, a cold, unyielding weight that hummed through the reinforced plating of his diving suit. He squinted through the murky water, the beam of his helmet light cutting a narrow path as he wrestled with the twisted guts of mining station's power core. The damn thing had been sputtering for days, threatening to shut down the whole operation, and Jordan, being the only engineer stubborn enough to dive this deep, was stuck fixing it. His gloved hands moved deftly, threading a new conduit into place, when a low rumble vibrated through the water. He froze, fingers tightening around the tool. That wasn't the station. Before he could process the sound, a deafening boom erupted from above, sending a shockwave that slammed him against the station's hull. Metal groaned and buckled, pinning his leg beneath a jagged slab of debris. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, but he bit it back, his training kicking in. Through the swirling silt, he saw the faint outline of a Klytheran ship retreating, a sleek, tentacled monstrosity that left chaos in its wake. "Great," Jordan muttered, his voice muffled inside his helmet. "Just what I needed." He tugged at his trapped leg, wincing as the metal scraped against his suit. The station was a wreck now, half collapsed, and his HUD blinked with warnings. Oxygen at 60%, structural integrity compromised. He was running out of time. Then he saw her. She floated just beyond the wreckage, a ghostly figure suspended in the current. Her body shimmered with a faint, bioluminescent glow, like a dying star against the dark water. 2 of her 6 tentacles hung limp, torn and trailing wisps of glowing fluid, blood, he realized, that spiraled outward in mesmerizing patterns. A Klytheran, an enemy. Jordan's hand instinctively went to the utility knife strapped to his thigh, but he hesitated. She wasn't moving, her form too still, too fragile. The intricate markings pulsing faintly across her skin caught his eye, swirls and glyphs he'd seen in intel briefings. High-ranking, maybe even elite. His comms crackled with static, no signal this deep. He was alone with her, and the station was seconds from caving in completely. "Screw it," he growled, releasing the knife. He activated the winch on his suit, firing a cable that latched onto a nearby strut. With a grunt, he yanked his leg free, ignoring the ache radiating up his calf, and swam toward her. She was lighter than he expected, her body yielding under his grip as he looped the cable around her torso. Her remaining tentacles twitched faintly, brushing against his arm, and he tensed, half expecting an attack. It didn't come. The ascent was slow, the winch grinding against the weight of them both. Jordan broke the surface near a rocky outcrop, the red sands of Eryndor's shore stretching out under a bruised, violet sky. He dragged her onto the jagged beach, collapsing beside her as he ripped off his helmet. Salt air stung his lungs, and he wiped sweat from his brow, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. She lay there, her glow dimming, the translator device embedded in her chest flickering as it booted up. Her voice came first, weak and trembling through the tech. "End me, surface dweller, or leave me to the tides." Jordan glanced at her, taking in the broken tentacles, the way her chest heaved with shallow breaths. She was a mess, but those markings, they weren't just decoration. She was someone important. He smirked, brushing sweat from his eyes. "Not my style to let someone bleed out, even if they've got more arms than me." She didn't respond, her deep, luminous eyes narrowing as she studied him. Jordan pushed himself to his feet, his mind racing. Leaving her here wasn't an option. Klytheran patrols would find her, or worse, his own people would. He knew an abandoned med station 30 miles south, a relic from the early colony days. It might have what he needed to patch her up, or at least keep her alive long enough to figure out what the hell was going on. He hauled her toward his sand skimmer, a battered rig parked near the shore. Her weight was awkward, her tentacles dragging slightly as he settled her onto the cargo bed. The engine sputtered to life under his hands, kicking up clouds of crimson dust. Jordan cast one last look at the ocean, its waves lapping hungrily at the rocks, then gunned the throttle, the horizon stretching out before him. Jordan gripped the sand skimmer's controls, the engine's whine slicing through the eerie silence of Eryndor's barren coastline. The red sands stretched endlessly before him, only broken by jagged rocks and the occasional skeletal remains of abandoned machinery. Zyraxa lay sprawled across the cargo bed behind him, her bioluminescent glow dim under the tarp he'd thrown over her. Every bump of the uneven terrain made him glance back, half expecting her to slide off, or worse, wake up swinging those tentacles. The med station was still 30 miles away, and the weight of that distance pressed down on him like the ache in his bruised leg. The wind kicked up, tugging at his jacket and whipping sand into his exposed skin. He squinted through the haze, his eyes stinging as dark clouds swirled on the horizon, promising trouble. "Just my luck," he muttered, adjusting his grip. The skimmer's speed was their only advantage, but that wouldn't mean much if the Klytheran patrols, or worse, his own people, spotted them first. He'd seen the human gunships prowling the skies earlier, their searchlights cutting through the dusky air. If they caught him hauling an alien, they'd shoot first, ask questions later. A faint hum snapped him back to reality, and his stomach clenched. He slowed the skimmer, scanning the sky. There it was, a Klytheran water glider, sleek and predatory, skimming low over the dunes. Jordan yanked a lever, veering the skimmer behind a towering rock spire. He killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening as he crouched low, heart hammering. Zyraxa stirred beneath the tarp, her translator crackling to life. "Why have we stopped?" Her voice was weak, but it had an edge to it now, sharp and demanding. Jordan kept his eyes fixed on the glider, its shadow creeping closer. "Quiet. They're hunting something, probably you." Her tentacles rustled faintly, and he shot her a warning glance. "Stay down. If they see you, we're both dead." The glider hovered for a tense moment, its sensors glinting in the fading light, then banked away toward the sea. Jordan exhaled, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. He restarted the skimmer, coaxing it back to life as the wind howled louder. "Close call," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You must have pissed someone off real bad." Zyraxa tilted her head slightly, her luminous eyes peeking out from under the tarp. "Why risk your life for an enemy?" she asked, her tone probing, as if testing him. Jordan smirked, keeping his focus on the path ahead as the first gusts of the sandstorm battered the skimmer. "Someone tried to drown you in your own ocean. I'm curious why." He paused, then added, "Plus, I'm not big on leaving people, or whatever you are, to rot." She fell silent for a moment, and he wondered if she'd slipped back into unconsciousness. Then her voice cut through the wind again. "My kind is not rot. We dissolve into the deep. It is cleaner." He snorted, surprised by the dry humor in her words. "Good to know. I'll skip the burial plans then." The storm hit full force, a wall of red sand that swallowed the horizon and turned the air into a gritty haze. Jordan cursed under his breath, slowing the skimmer to navigate a narrow pass between two cliffs. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the controls vibrated under his hands as the wind fought to rip them off course. He glanced back at Zyraxa, her form barely visible through the swirling dust. "You holding up back there?" "Barely," she replied, her translator flickering with static. "Your machines are loud. Primitive." "Yeah, well, they get the job done," he shot back, wrestling the skimmer around a boulder. "What happened down there, anyway? That ship didn't blow you up for fun." Her glow pulsed faintly, a sign she was still conscious. "Betrayal," she said, the word heavy despite the flat tone of the device. Vortek, my warlord, seeks to end the talks with your kind. He believes peace weakens us. Jordan's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about the negotiations, whispers among the crew about a ceasefire, but he'd never seen any solid proof. Peace, huh? That why you're floating half-dead instead of sitting on a throne? I'm no longer on a throne, she replied, and there was something raw in her voice, a crack the translator couldn't hide. Vortek turned my own guard against me. The explosion was his work. He processed that, the pieces clicking into place. Aku. No wonder the Klytherans were scouring the coast. So you're a queen on the run, he said, steering through the storm's chaos. And I'm the idiot stuck playing taxi. You chose this, she countered, her eyes glinting as they caught a stray beam of light. Why? Jordan didn't answer right away, focusing on the faint outline of a dune ahead. The truth was, he didn't fully know. Curiosity, maybe, or just a nagging feeling of seeing someone, alien or not, left to die. Let's just say, I don't like bullies, he finally said. Even ones with tentacles. The storm howled on, sand pelting the skimmer like 1,000 tiny fists. Jordan spotted a faint shape in the distance, a rusted beacon tower, half buried in the dunes. It wasn't the med station, but it might offer shelter. He angled the skimmer toward it, the engine groaning under the strain as he pushed through the worsening gale. Jordan hunched over the sand skimmer's control panel, now a mess of wires and circuits he'd hacked together with his knife. The rusted beacon tower groaned around him, its skeletal frame half sunk into the crimson dunes, a forgotten relic of Eryndor's past. Outside, the sandstorm raged, pounding against the metal walls and whistling through gaps with a sound like a wounded animal. The air inside carried the faint, salty tang of the ocean beyond the horizon. It wasn't much, but the tower's sturdy bones held firm for now. He wiped grime from his hands, his fingers twitching from the cold creeping through his jacket. The skimmer's battery was shot after the brutal trek, but he'd salvaged enough parts to rig something functional. A faint hum sparked to life as he connected a coil to the tower's flickering power grid, a relic of human engineering that hadn't quite given up. Come on, you old bastard, he muttered, coaxing the makeshift heater to life. A weak glow flickered from the device, casting jagged shadows across the dusty floor. Zyraxa shifted in the corner, her bioluminescent skin pulsing faintly as she dragged one functional tentacle across the ground. She swept away layers of sand and debris, uncovering a tangle of broken cables and a cracked datapad. Jordan watched her from the corner of his eye, impressed despite himself. She was a wreck, 2 tentacles limp, her body bruised, but she moved with a sense of purpose, like she wouldn't let the pain win. Your kind clings to metal shells, she remarked, her translator buzzing faintly as she nudged the datapad aside. So fragile. Jordan smirked, twisting a final wire into place. Yeah, well, your superior tentacles didn't stop you from washing up half dead. He tapped the heater, and it sputtered to life, radiating a thin warmth that cut through the chill. Her head tilted, and her translator hummed in a rhythm that almost sounded like a laugh. Perhaps we are both flawed, she said, her luminous eyes catching the heater's glow. There was something playful in her tone that caught him off guard. He leaned back against the wall, stretching his aching leg. Flawed's one way to put it. I'm stuck babysitting an alien queen in a sandstorm, and you're, picking through trash with one good arm. 2, she corrected, lifting another tentacle slightly before it drooped back down. And I'm no queen now. Not until I reclaim what Vortek stole. Jordan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. So, this Vortek guy, he's the one who turned your own people against you? What's his deal? She paused, her tentacle curling around a rusted bolt as if testing its weight. He commands the deep fleets, she replied, her voice steady but tinged with bitterness. He sees your machines tearing into our waters, taking what we guard. He believes war is strength. Peace, he calls it surrender. Jordan nodded slowly, piecing it together. He'd seen the mining rigs himself, huge, ugly things that churned up the ocean floor. Most of the crew didn't care about the damage. as long as the quotas were met. Sounds like a real charmer, he said. But if you're for peace, why'd he go after you so hard? Zyrax's glow flared briefly before dimming again. I spoke of sharing, your tools for our resources. A balance. He called it treason. She tossed the bolt aside, the clink echoing in the small space. My kind does not forgive such dissent. Neither does mine, Jordan said, thinking of the corporate overseers who'd skin him alive if they knew he was here. Guess we've got that in common. The heater's warmth spread, easing the tension in his shoulders. He stood to check Zyrax's wounds, brushing past her to kneel at her side. His hand grazed one of her broken tentacles, and a sudden heat bloomed in the air, subtle, sweet, like the scent of rain over the sea. She stiffened, her glow pulsing brighter, and Jordan froze, his pulse quickening. What was that? He asked, pulling his hand back but not breaking eye contact. Zyrax's eyes narrowed, studying him. A reflex, she said, her translator faltering for a moment. My kind, we release it when we sense compatibility. It is not intentional. Compatibility? He let out a short, incredulous laugh, trying to shake off the odd pull in his chest. You're saying I smell good to you? It is not smell, she corrected, her tone sharp but curious. It is presence, strength. You carry it differently than my kin. Jordan rubbed the back of his neck, heat creeping up his face. Well, that's a new one, he said, forcing a grin. Never thought I'd be flirting with an alien in a junk heap. Flirting, she echoed, the word clumsy through the device. Explain. He chuckled, shaking his head. Forget it. Just don't go glowing at me like that. It's distracting. She didn't respond, but her tentacle brushed the floor lightly, almost thoughtful. The storm's howl softened for a moment, and Jordan settled back against the wall, the heater's faint light casting shifting shadows across Zyrax's shimmering form. He couldn't quite name the feeling tugging at him. Curiosity, sure, but something else too, something that made him watch her a little longer than he meant to. Jordan crouched beside the sand skimmer, his hands moving swiftly as he pried open the side panel, working fast to salvage a bundle of frayed wires and a dented fuel cell from the debris of the old beacon tower. The storm outside had settled into a low murmur, but the air still carried the bite of sand. A bruised sky, streaked with gray, loomed overhead. This'll do, he muttered, threading the components into place with practiced ease. The engine coughed once before humming to life, weak but steady. He glanced over at Zyraxa, her glow faint but constant as she leaned against the wall. Time to move. The med station's about 10 miles south. Let's get there before this planet decides to throw something else at us. Zyraxa slid onto the cargo bed with graceful fluidity, her remaining tentacles steadying her against the skimmer's frame. Jordan hit the throttle, and they rolled forward, the rusted beacon tower disappearing behind them, swallowed by the dust. The red dunes shimmered under the shifting light, and the air grew heavier with moisture as dark clouds began to gather overhead. Looks like rain, he said, squinting at the horizon. Figures, just when I thought we'd get a break. Zyrax's translator crackled faintly. Rain is life to my kind, she said, her voice tinged with something almost wistful. It sings to the deep. Does it not comfort you? Jordan snorted, steering around a jagged outcrop. Comfort? Where I'm from, it just means wet boots and rusting gear. You're telling me you'd swim in this stuff for fun? Not for fun, she replied, her tentacle brushing the edge of the skimmer. For survival. Our young are born in the rain pools, soft, fleeting homes before the sea claims them. He shot her a sidelong glance, intrigued by the unexpected poetry in her words. That's weirdly poetic. We don't have anything like that. Kids come out screaming in sterile rooms, usually with someone yelling at you to sign a form. Her head tilted, a flicker of curiosity in her glowing eyes. Your kind binds life to paper? Strange custom. Yeah, well, we're big on rules, he said, his tone dry. Too many, if you ask me. Ever think about just swimming away from all of this? You're built for it. Ditch the war and disappear. The skimmer jolted over a dip, and Zyrax's glow pulsed briefly. The deep is my home, she said, her voice tightening. But it betrayed me. Vortek turned my kin against me, my guards, my council. Where would I go? Jordan's grip on the controls tightened, a flicker of recognition hitting him. Fair point, he said, his voice softening. I tried running once, after a job went bad. Rig collapsed, lost half my crew. Thought I'd quit, walk away. Didn't stick, couldn't leave the rest behind. Guess we're both stuck fighting, huh? She was silent for a moment, the hum of the engine filling the quiet. You fight for your kind, she said finally. I fight for what could be. Is that not different? Jordan smirked, but there was no edge to it this time. Maybe, but I'm starting to think what could be isn't such a bad idea. Beats scrapping over rocks and water forever. Raindrops began to speckle the skimmer, cold and sharp against his skin. The dunes gave way to a rocky shore, the ground turning slick as the downpour intensified. Your people, they all like Vortek? He asked, raising his voice over the growing patter. All teeth and no talk. No, she replied, her tentacle curling inward. Most crave the old ways, hunting, guarding the depths. But some listen when I spoke of truce. They saw your machines, your fire, and wondered. Vortek fears that wonder. He calls it weakness. Jordan nodded, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. Sounds familiar. My side's got plenty who'd rather blow you all up than share a damn thing. Me? I've seen what those rigs do. Tear up everything, leave nothing. Doesn't sit right. Zyraxa's glow steadied, her eyes fixed on him. You question your own? That is rare. Rare's one way to put it, he said, wiping water from his eyes. Trouble's another. Keeps me up at night, though, wondering if I'm fixing the wrong things. The skimmer slowed, its wheels slipping in the thickening mud, and a squat shape loomed ahead. The med station, its rusted walls barely holding against the storm. Jordan angled toward it, the rain now a relentless sheet that drummed against the vehicle. He pulled up to the entrance, cutting the engine as water streamed down his face. He turned to Zyraxa. Into the line, he said, offering a hand to help her down. Her tentacle brushed his palm, a fleeting warmth against the cold, and they stepped into the shelter together. Jordan stumbled into the abandoned med station, the weight of the journey clinging to him like damp sand. Rain hammered the rusted roof, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out everything beyond the flickering emergency lights. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and long-forgotten metal. Still, it was shelter, more than the crumbling beacon tower had offered. He dropped his gear by the door and peeled off the outer layer of his dive suit, the fabric heavy with sweat and grit. His undershirt clung to his chest, outlining the lean muscle he'd earned from years of battling machinery in Eryndor's unforgiving depths. Zyraxa lay propped against a dented exam table, her bioluminescent skin casting soft ripples of light across the dim room. Her broken tentacles trailed limply, but the others curled inward, protective. Jordan grabbed an old med scanner from a shelf, its cracked screen still functional, and knelt beside her. Let's see how bad it is, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. He brushed his hand along one of her injured limbs, careful not to press too hard. Her skin was warm, almost feverish, and a faint shimmer danced under his touch, like sunlight breaking through the ocean surface. She shivered, a subtle tremor that made her remaining tentacles stir. One of them slipped around his wrist, not gripping, but tracing, soft as a whisper against his pulse. My kind bonds through touch and scent, she murmured, her translator quivering with a strange, lilting cadence. You trigger this in me. Jordan looked up, caught in the deep, glowing pools of her eyes. His breath hitched, heavier than it should have been, and the air around them felt charged, warm, thick like the moment before a storm. So I'm your type? He said, his voice low and husky. That's a first across species. He tried to laugh it off, but the heat in his chest betrayed him, raw and unbidden. Zyraxa leaned in closer, her body swaying like the tide, deliberate and unguarded. Another tentacle brushed his shoulder, leaving a faint trail of luminescence on his skin, a mark that glowed and faded like a secret shared in the dark. Your warmth, it calls to me, she said, her words pulsing with the rhythm of her light, now flickering in time with her quickening breath. Jordan's hand tightened around her tentacle, feeling the strength beneath the silken surface. His own heartbeat matched hers, a pull that was impossible to ignore. The space between them dissolved, the rain's roar softening to a distant hum. Her glow surged, bathing them in a fleeting brilliance, and her tentacles wove around him, not in restraint, but enveloping, like the sea cradling the shore. His fingers traced the curve of her arm, drawn to the warmth radiating from her core. The air thickened with a scent like salt and wild blooms, intoxicating alive. It wasn't just touch. It was emerging, a dance of light and shadow that blurred the lines of where he ended and she began. Time slipped away, lost in the unspoken connection that carried them beyond words. When the light dimmed, her tentacles gently withdrew, leaving only the faint ghost of their touch on his skin. Zyrax's voice broke the silence, soft and unsteady. "This cannot be." "Yet it is," she whispered, her eyes still locked on his, searching. She withdrew further, but the connection lingered, a thread taut between them. Jordan sat back, chest heaving, dragging a hand through his hair. His mind spun, caught between the rush of what had just happened and the questions clawing at him. Was it her pheromones, some alien trick wiring his brain? Or was it her, the way she fought, the way she spoke, the way she looked at him like he was more than just a human caught in her war? "That was something," he said, his voice hoarse, testing the waters. "You okay?" She tilted her head, her glow steadying. "I am uncertain," she admitted, a rare crack in her composure. "This is not known to my kind. A surface dweller should not resonate so." "Resonate," he echoed, tasting the word. "That what you call it?" Felt more like drowning, in a good way maybe. He smirked, but his eyes softened, probing deeper. "You're telling me you've never felt that before?" "Not with your kind," she said, her tentacle brushing the table's edge as if grounding herself. "It is a pull. Instinct yet more. I do not understand it." Jordan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the med scanner forgotten beside him. "Yeah, well, I'm not exactly an expert on alien chemistry either. But I felt it too, whatever that was." He paused, then added, "You're tougher than you look, you know that? Most people, human or not, would have given up back there." Her eyes flickered, a hint of pride surfacing. "And you are more than your machines suggest," she replied. "You carry me when you could have left." "Why?" He shrugged, but the weight of her question lingered. "Maybe I'm just stubborn," he said. "Or maybe I don't like seeing someone get screwed over by their own people." Sound familiar? The rain pounded harder, its rhythm steady against the roof, and Jordan reached for the scanner again, its faint beep cutting through the quiet. He held it over her, watching the readings flicker, but his mind was still adrift, tangled in the echo of her touch and the strange, unshakable pull she'd stirred in him. Jordan stood by the cracked window of the med station, staring through the rain-smeared glass as the storm's fury battered the rusted walls. The faint hum of the scanner had just faded, its readings confirming that Zyrax's wounds were stable. Barely, when a low, guttural rumble cut through the storm's roar. His gut twisted. He recognized that sound. Klytheran engines, sleek and predatory, closing in fast. "They're here," he muttered, voice tight, grabbing his utility knife from the table. His fingers flew to the dusty control panel on the wall, hoping the station's old defenses still had some life left in them. Zyraxa rose beside him, her bioluminescent glow flaring brighter despite the strain in her movements. "Vortec," she hissed, her translator sharp with venom. "He tracks my scent. My essence lingers too long." Her tentacles flexed, testing their strength, and Jordan caught the flicker of determination in her eyes. She wasn't running anymore. "Guess your pheromones aren't just for me," he said, forcing a grin as he punched commands into the panel. A faint whine sparked to life. Old laser turrets buried in the station's frame, their power cells flickering but still holding. "Let's give him a welcome he won't forget." He hit the activation key, and a dull thud echoed through the room as the turrets groaned into position, their barrels swiveling toward the approaching Klytheran shadows. Outside, the rain parted like a curtain, revealing vortex forces. 5 Klytheran warriors, their hulking forms glistening under the downpour, flanked by 2 water gliders gliding low. The leader, a towering figure with jagged scars across his chest, barked orders in a guttural tongue Jordan didn't need to translate. They had come for blood. Vortex cold, unyielding eyes locked onto the station, and Jordan swore he saw a smirk twist across the warlord's maw. "Stay low," Jordan told Zyraxa, ducking as the first glider fired, a pulse of energy that scorched the wall above them, sending sparks flying. He slammed his hand on the turret controls, and a jagged beam of red light sliced through the storm, clipping the glider's wing. It veered off course, crashing into the mud with a satisfying thud. One down, he muttered, adrenaline surging. Zyraxa moved to the shattered window, her body tensing as she surveyed the enemy. "They will not stop," she said, stepping into view and letting her light flare into a blinding blaze. The Klytherans faltered, their eyes, built for the dim depths, blinded by the onslaught. One stumbled, clutching his face, and Jordan seized the moment, triggering another laser burst. The beam struck the warrior mid-step, sending him sprawling into the mud. Vortek roared, his tentacles lashing as he charged, shrugging off the light like it was nothing. Jordan cursed, diving for a rusted pipe wrench on the floor. His knife wouldn't be enough against that beast. "He's all yours," Jordan shouted, tossing a glance at Zyraxa. She met his look with a nod, then surged forward, her glow pulsing in rhythmic waves. She met Vortek head-on, her remaining tentacles whipping out to block his strike, the clash ringing like steel on stone. Jordan circled wide, wrench in hand, aiming to flank the warlord. The turrets fired again, pinning the remaining warriors behind cover. Zyraxa and Vortek grappled, her light clashing with his dark bulk, a dance of fury and strength. "You betrayed our blood," she snarled, her translator crackling with rage. Vortek's response was a guttural laugh, and his tentacles slammed into her, sending her crashing against the wall. Before Jordan could swing, a new sound cut through the chaos, a sharp whine, human-made. He spun, spotting a sleek dropship breaking through the storm, its hull marked with the scratched insignia of the colony guard. "About damn time," he breathed, recognizing the craft. It landed with a hard thud, kicking up mud, and a figure leaped out. Lara Chun, her short crop hair plastered to her face, pistol already drawn. "Stand down, Mason," Chun barked, her voice cutting through the storm as her team fanned out, weapons trained on the Klytherans. Vortek froze, his grip on Zyraxa loosening as he realized the new threat. Chin's eyes flicked between Zyraxa and Jordan. "You've got some explaining to do." Jordan lowered the wrench, chest heaving. "Yeah, well, I'm not the one late to the party." He stepped closer to Zyraxa, who had straightened, her light steadying as she faced Vortek down. "She's with me." Chin's brow furrowed, but she didn't argue. Not yet. "We've got bigger problems," she said, holstering her pistol. "I know her. We talked truce months ago before the suits shut it down." She jerked her head toward Vortek. "He's the bastard who torched our envoy." Zyrax's glow flared, fierce and unyielding. "We stand as one, or we sink together," she said, her voice ringing over the rain, a declaration that silenced even Vortek's snarling. She turned to Jordan, her eyes locking with his, and he felt that pull again, stronger now, forged in the fight. He gripped the wrench tighter, stepping to her side. "I carried you this far," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not letting go now." He shot a glance at Chun. "You in, or are we doing this alone?" Chin's lips twitched, a rare hint of a smile. "In," she said, signaling her team. "But we've got work to do." The dropship's engines flared to life as Chin's squad moved in, pinning down Vortek's remaining warriors. Jordan and Zyraxa struck together, her light blinding, his wrench crashing against a Klytheran skull. Vortek lunged, but Chin's pistol barked, a shot grazing his shoulder. He staggered, roaring in fury, and Zyraxa seized the opening. Her tentacles coiled around his arms, forcing him to his knees. The warlord's glare burned, but his fight was over. Chin approached, rain dripping from her cap. "He's yours to deal with," she said to Zyraxa, turning to Jordan. "You've stirred the hornet's nest. Vortex out, but the core won't let this slide. They've got too much invested." Jordan wiped mud from his face, still gripping the wrench. "Let them come," he said, glancing at Zyraxa. Her glow softened, but her stance held firm. He knew they weren't done fighting. Not yet. The dropship's lights cut through the storm as Chin's team secured the perimeter, the air thick with the promise of what was to come. Jordan stepped onto the crimson sands of Eryndor's shore, the damp grains crunching beneath his boots as the ocean's restless waves hissed against the beach. The air was thick with tension, saturated with the salt of the sea and the weight of 100 eyes, human and Klytheran alike, watching from makeshift stands carved into the cliffs. Above, the sky burned with a deep gold from the setting sun, casting long shadows that danced across the faint silhouettes of corporate warships hovering like vultures. He tightened his grip on Zyraxa's tentacle, feeling her warmth seep into his palm, steadying the nerves that prickled under his skin. The battle with Vortek felt like it had happened hours ago, though it had only been a day. Chin's team had hauled the warlord off in cuffs, his snarls echoing as the dropship's doors slammed shut. Now, here they were, standing before a crowd that could tip into chaos with a single wrong word. Jordan's undershirt clung to him, still damp from the rain, but he squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of every mile he'd carried Zyraxa. She stood tall beside him, her glow a quiet fire against the fading light, her broken tentacles healing but still kept close. Chun strode ahead, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathered delegates. "We're here to end this," she said, her tone clipped and commanding. "No more blood, no more greed. You've seen what happens when the core and warlords call the shots." She gestured toward Jordan and Zyraxa, a flicker of something like pride in her eyes. "They've got something to say." Jordan felt the crowd's gaze shift, a mix of skepticism and curiosity boring into him. He stepped forward with Zyraxa, her tentacle sliding up to intertwine with his fingers, a gesture that felt strange, yet somehow right, like a tool fitting into his hand after years of use. She moved first, her light swelling into a radiant pulse that silenced the whispers. "I am Zyraxa, voice of the deep," she said, her translator projecting her words with a resonance that rippled over the waves. "This human, Jordan, bore me across the sands through storm and fire. He is my strength as I am his." A murmur rolled through the Klytherans, warriors and elders alike, their eyes wide her declaration. Jordan caught the term companion, whispered among them, a word heavy with meaning he was only beginning to understand. He squeezed her tentacle, feeling the eyes of his own people on him as well, miners, soldiers, and even a few suited execs who'd been dragged from their ships. "She's right," he said, his voice rough but steady, cutting through the wind. "This isn't just about us. It's about proving that we're better together. Humans, Klytherans, all of us. I've seen what tearing this planet apart gets us. Nothing worth keeping." Chin nodded from the sidelines, her arms crossed as she watched the crowd. A Klytheran elder, his skin etched with glowing scars, stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. "You claim a surface dweller as companion?" he asked, skepticism threading his tone. "This is not our way." "It is my way," Zyraxa replied, her light flaring with defiance. "The deep thrives through change. He has proven his worth, not by blood, but by will. Vortek sought to drown us in war. I choose a tide that lifts us all." Jordan shifted his stance, feeling the weight of her words settle into him. "Look," he said, turning toward the humans now, his gaze locking on a cluster of miners he recognized from the rigs. "I've spent years fixing machines that tear this place apart. I'm done with that. We can build something instead, share it. She's not the enemy. The suits up there are." He pointed to the warships, their engines humming ominously overhead. A ripple of agreement passed through the miners, their faces weathered but open. One of Chen's lieutenants handed her a datapad, which she raised high. "We got terms," she announced. "Resource split. C to the Klytherans, tech to us. No more fighting over scraps. Sign it, or we're back to square one." The elder hesitated, then dipped his head, a tentacle tracing a glyph in the sand, a mark of assent. Chen's team moved swiftly, passing the pad to the human representatives who scrawled their names with grim determination. Vortex's defeat had cracked the old order, and Jordan could feel the shift, fragile but real. Zyrax's tentacle tightened around his, a silent anchor as the crowd began to disperse, delegates muttering plans under the dying light. They drifted toward the water's edge, away from the noise, the waves lapping at their feet. Jordan kicked a loose stone into the surf, watching it vanish beneath the foam. "That was something," he said, glancing at her. "Companion, huh? Sound spellmano." "It is," she said, her glow softening to match the sunset's hue, a shimmering blend of gold and blue. "In my kind, it binds us to fight, to build, to endure. You chose this path with me." He smirked, but it faded into a quieter look. "Yes, I did. No regrets yet." He paused, then added, "You think this'll hold?" "The Corps won't like losing their grip." Her eyes followed the horizon, where the warships lingered like dark stains. "They will test us," she said, "but we are more than they expect. Together." Jordan nodded, the salt air cool against his skin as he stood beside her, her light weaving into the twilight. The treaty was signed, Vortex was gone, and the beach stretched out before them, a canvas unmarked but brimming with possibility. He bent to pick up a smooth shell from the sand, turning it over in his hand as the first stars pierced the sky above.